In the world of crime, there are many stories that are dark, shocking, and sometimes terrifying. But every once in a while, a case appears that is so strange and absurd that even the police officers involved can hardly believe what they are seeing. This is the story of one of those cases. A robbery attempt that quickly became famous across the internet. Not because of its danger, but because of how unbelievably ridiculous it was. It all happened in 2021 in a small American town where most days were quiet and uneventful. The town had a few local grocery stores, gas stations, and family-owned shops where neighbors often knew each other by name. Crime was not completely unheard of, but serious incidents were rare. Most police calls involved minor issues like parking disputes or noise complaints. But one afternoon, a situation began that would soon become one of the strangest robbery attempts the town had ever seen. It started inside a small convenience store located near a busy intersection. The store sold snacks, drinks, cigarettes, and basic groceries. Like many convenience stores, it was open almost all day and night. The afternoon shift was being handled by a young cashier who had been working there for several months. It was a quiet day. Only a few customers were walking in and out. Some bought coffee. Others grabbed snacks or drinks. Nothing unusual. But shortly after 3 p.m., a man walked into the store. At first, nothing about him seemed suspicious. He was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He looked like an ordinary customer. He walked slowly through the aisles, glancing at the shelves. He picked up a few small items and carried them toward the counter. The cashier greeted him politely, just like every other customer. But as the man approached the counter, something strange happened. Instead of placing the items down normally, the man suddenly moved his hand inside his jacket pocket. Then he leaned forward slightly and spoke in a serious voice. "This is a robbery," he said quietly. The cashier froze. Robberies were rare in the town, but everyone knew how dangerous they could be. The man kept his hand hidden inside his jacket. He pushed the pocket forward slightly as if something inside was pointing outward. To the cashier, it looked like the shape of a small gun. The man spoke again. "Give me the money from the register," he said. The cashier's heart began racing. Store employees are trained to stay calm during robberies. The most important rule is simple: do not argue, do not resist, and do not try to be a hero. Money can be replaced. Lives cannot. So the cashier slowly reached for the register. But something about the situation felt strange. The man seemed nervous. His voice was shaky. He kept glancing around the store as if he was afraid someone might notice him. Still, the cashier followed procedure and opened the cash register. Inside was a small amount of cash from the afternoon sales. But before the cashier could hand the money over, something unexpected happened. Another customer walked into the store. The new customer had no idea what was happening. He walked toward the drink refrigerator at the back of the store. The robber immediately became more nervous. He leaned closer to the counter and whispered more urgently. "Just hurry up and give me the money." The cashier hesitated. Something about the robber's behavior seemed unusual. The man's hand was still inside his jacket pocket. But the shape of the weapon looked strange. It didn't quite look like a gun. It looked softer. The cashier tried to focus. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe the robber was holding something small. The situation was tense. But then something happened that completely changed the moment. The man moved slightly, and for just a second, the cashier saw inside the jacket pocket. What was inside was not metal. It was not a weapon. It was something yellow, curved, and very familiar. The robber was not holding a gun. He was holding a banana. For a moment, the cashier thought their eyes must be playing tricks on them. Surely this could not be real. But when the robber shifted again, it became clear. The object inside the jacket pocket was unmistakable. It was a banana. A completely ordinary banana. The situation had suddenly become incredibly bizarre. The robber was trying to threaten the store with a piece of fruit. The cashier struggled to stay serious. But the absurdity of the moment was almost overwhelming. Meanwhile, the robber seemed completely unaware that his secret had been discovered. He still believed the cashier thought he had a weapon. But what the robber didn't realize was that the situation was about to take a very unexpected turn. Because within minutes, someone in the store would quietly alert the police. And when officers arrived, they would discover that this strange robbery attempt was even more ridiculous than it first appeared. As the robber stood at the counter pretending to have a weapon hidden inside his jacket, the tension in the small convenience store grew thicker. But the situation was no longer as frightening as it first seemed. The cashier had already seen the truth. Inside the robber's jacket pocket was not a gun. It was a banana. A regular yellow banana. For a moment, the cashier struggled to remain calm. Store employees are trained to treat every robbery as serious. Even if something looks strange, they are told not to take risks. But now the situation felt almost unbelievable. The robber, however, still believed he was in control. He leaned closer to the counter. "Hurry up," he whispered again. The cashier slowly removed some money from the register. But while doing so, they pressed a small button beneath the counter. It was a silent alarm. The button immediately sent a signal to the local police department. Outside the store, nothing seemed unusual. Cars continued passing through the intersection. People walked along the sidewalk. But inside the police station, officers received the alert. A robbery was in progress. Within seconds, a patrol car was dispatched. Back inside the store, the robber was becoming more anxious. The other customer in the store had not yet noticed what was happening. He was still choosing a drink from the refrigerator. The robber glanced toward him nervously. His hand remained inside his jacket pocket, still holding the banana in a threatening position. From a distance, the shape might have looked convincing. But from the cashier's position, the truth was obvious. Still, the cashier decided to play along. They handed a small amount of cash across the counter. The robber quickly grabbed it. For a brief moment, it seemed like he might escape. But just as he turned toward the door, the customer near the refrigerator finally noticed something strange. He had seen the robber hiding his hand inside his jacket. He had heard the tense conversation at the counter. And he realized something suspicious was happening. The customer quietly stepped aside and pulled out his phone. He began recording. Within moments, the robber pushed open the store door and stepped outside. He tried to walk away quickly. But before he could reach the end of the parking lot, flashing red and blue lights appeared at the entrance. 2 police cars pulled into the lot. The robber froze. He looked around, suddenly unsure what to do. The officers stepped out of their vehicles. "Sir, stop where you are," one of them shouted. The robber hesitated. For a second, it seemed like he might try to run. But he quickly realized that escaping would be impossible. Slowly, he raised his hands. The officers approached carefully. Even though the situation looked strange, they had to assume the suspect might still be dangerous. One officer moved behind him and secured his hands. Another officer carefully checked the suspect's jacket pocket. What he found made him pause. He slowly pulled the object out. Then he looked at his partner. The object in his hand was a banana. A slightly bruised, very ordinary banana. For a moment, none of the officers said anything. Then one of them shook his head in disbelief. "This is what you used to rob the store?" he asked. The suspect looked embarrassed. He didn't say anything. Back inside the store, the cashier and the customer watched through the window as the officers placed the robber into the back of the patrol car. The tension that had filled the store only minutes earlier suddenly turned into something else. Disbelief. And a little bit of laughter. The officers soon returned inside to speak with the witnesses. The cashier explained everything. They described how the man had threatened them with what looked like a weapon. But then they revealed the truth. They had seen the banana inside the jacket pocket. One of the officers couldn't help but smile. He had been involved in many strange cases during his career. But this one was definitely unusual. Meanwhile, outside the store, another problem was beginning for the robber. The customer who had recorded the incident was now uploading the video to social media. Within a short time, the clip began spreading online. People were shocked. Not because of how dangerous the robbery was, but because of how ridiculous it seemed. A robbery, committed with a banana. But the story was not over yet. Because once the suspect was taken to the police station and questioned, the details of why he attempted such a bizarre crime would make the situation even stranger. After the suspect was taken to the police station, officers began the formal questioning process. At first, the man sat quietly in the interrogation room. He looked tired, embarrassed, and a little confused about how everything had gone so wrong. Across the table, two detectives reviewed the evidence from the scene. The cashier's statement was clear. The customer's video recording was already saved. And of course, there was the most unusual piece of evidence of all. The banana. One of the detectives placed the evidence bag on the table. Inside the clear plastic bag was the slightly bruised fruit that had been used in the robbery attempt. The detective looked at the suspect. "So, you want to explain this?" he asked calmly. For a moment, the man didn't answer. Then he sighed. What he said next surprised the officers. He admitted everything almost immediately. He said that he had never planned to hurt anyone. He didn't have a real weapon. He didn't even have a fake one. All he had was the banana. According to the suspect, the idea had come to him only a short time before the robbery. Earlier that day, he had been walking around town with almost no money. He had recently lost his job. He had bills to pay. And he was becoming desperate. At some point, he went into a small grocery store and bought a banana as a cheap snack. As he walked outside eating it, a strange idea crossed his mind. He remembered seeing movies where robbers hid a weapon inside their jacket to make it look like they had a gun. And suddenly, he thought he could do the same thing. The banana was curved. From the outside, under a jacket pocket, it could look like something else. At least from a distance. He convinced himself that the plan might work. He believed the cashier would be too afraid to question it. So he walked to the nearby convenience store and tried it. But almost immediately, the plan began to fall apart. The robber had not thought about several important things. First, the shape of a banana is very different from the shape of a gun. Second, bananas are soft. They move easily when touched. And third, security cameras capture everything. The detectives listened carefully. Even though they had heard many strange explanations from suspects before, this one was unusual. One detective leaned back in his chair. "So your entire plan," he said slowly, "was based on a banana?" The suspect nodded. At that point, even the officers struggled to keep straight faces. But despite how ridiculous the situation seemed, the crime itself was still serious. Threatening someone during a robbery is still considered a criminal offense, even if the weapon turns out to be fake. The suspect was officially charged with attempted robbery. Later that day, the video recorded by the customer spread rapidly across the internet. Local news stations picked up the story. Soon the strange robbery attempt became a viral headline. People online could hardly believe it. Some joked that it might be the healthiest weapon ever used in a robbery. Others laughed at how quickly the plan had failed. But the story also carried an important lesson. Crimes that seem simple or clever in someone's imagination rarely work the way they expect. Desperation can lead people to make foolish decisions. And sometimes those decisions become unforgettable stories. For the police officers involved, the case became one of those moments they would remember for years. They had responded to many serious crimes during their careers. But very few involved fruit as the primary weapon. And for the suspect, the lesson came quickly and publicly. His attempt to scare someone with a banana had not only failed. It had turned him into the subject of one of the strangest robbery stories the town had ever seen. In the end, the case proved something simple. Crime is rarely as clever as criminals think it is. And sometimes, the smallest and most ridiculous mistakes can turn a criminal plan into a story that the entire internet will laugh about for years.